You're listening to the Spy-Fi After Dark podcast. And we are back with Spy-Fi After Dark. Today we have our new guest, first time on his podcast. Want to say your name?
Krish.
What's
going on, Krish?
And of course, Alex, as always.
Hey, everyone.
We're going to be talking about, we're going to start with some COVID talk and healthcare system general talk. I know we had promised to only do one COVID episode, but we're going to break the rule a little bit. There's 6 other episodes in between that one and this one. I think that's pretty fair. And then towards the end, if we have some time, we may pivot to something a little more lighthearted. We'll see what happens. Mm-hmm. And of course, before we get started, this episode is sponsored by the Iowa Maucus Project. And of course, you can find me on Twitter at Millan Tweets and Instagram at Millan Grams. Krish, you have a handle you want to show, or
no,
or anything you want people to know about at all, or do you just want to be completely anonymous?
I'm silent on social media for the most part. Right, I'm in the dark because I don't like getting caught up in the now.
I see. Okay. That's fine. Alex?
No, same.
Okay.
Same.
Well, let's get into it then.
We're more or less useless in that capacity.
We're great conversation starters.
So we were talking before we started about the healthcare system.
Right.
So I guess maybe we could just start with like single payer healthcare as a discussion.
Okay.
Because it's obviously come up a lot in recent times.
Well, you're going to know a little bit more about single payer than me. But there are a few arguments there I just wanted to consider. And I want to make sure that if single payer is considering the fact that we have a far more complex healthcare system than multiple other countries, then I understand it.
Well, I think any realistic single payer plan would account for the fact that it would take time to fully implement the whole thing. Like it wouldn't just happen overnight.
100%.
So obviously there are logistic concerns, right? And you were mentioning before we started, what were the different factors in the current pricing model? You want to lay those out again?
The different factors in the pricing model of keeping a patient in the hospital or charging for a specific medication.
Yeah, just essentially all the moving parts, because that may not be understood by the general person.
There's so many moving parts, man. I mean, it's just the fact that a procedure or a medication can cost so the variability in that cost across the nation within the same state in different hospital systems.
You got to talk directly to it.
Okay. Got it.
That's the most important part.
Okay. So the variability is just so high. It's unbelievable. You could pay a certain amount for a certain medication in a hospital system run by Dignity Health, and it could cost you way more or way less based on the relationships they have with PBMs, the relationships they have with whoever else. It's just a complicated system with no true visibility to the back end on how a hospital system is functioning. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that there's that much visibility. We have a very complex system. A single pair, like Canada has a generalized healthcare system, right? Mm-hmm. And they do a relatively, it's also relatively standard. You have the same price.
Direction has to be the same direction. So even if you move your head, you got to do this. You got to pivot around.
It's all relative. You are expecting to pay the same for the same procedure anywhere you go across the country. You don't expect to pay for pregnancies. You don't expect to pay for, delivery and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. There is an expectation in the US. And I think that the biggest complication comes from the fact that there is no standardization in that model. So I don't know if I had a child, I don't know if I'm going to pay $10,000 out the door or $25,000 out the door for the same procedure.
Well, first of all, that would be a medical miracle.
Right. Wait, what?
If you had a child.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate it. If my significant other had a child in the future.
You're absolutely right. There's basically no transparency, and you do not know what it's going to cost going in the door. Yeah. There was a proposed rule change under the Trump administration to require healthcare providers to disclose their negotiated insurance prices publicly for anyone, which I support, but I think it doesn't really solve the core of the problem.
Right.
It's just a slightly better improvement on what already exists, theoretically.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of problems. One of the things that when I was doing my master's in biomedical diagnostics, I did my sorry. I'm
excited about this.
You got to get used to it. It's literally like you gotta like
Dude, my nose is so freaking itchy. Sorry.
To the audience, he's allergic to cats.
Yes, and I have a cat.
Where was I?
Well, he was talking about how
I was saying the rule change doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, he said, and then you said there are a myriad of problems. More to it than that. More to the lack of
Well,
disclosure.
I lost my place.
Okay.
Simple as that.
All right.
Oh, no, I found it. I was doing a comparative analysis of the FDA versus other countries and how they get their evidentiary requirements for releasing drugs to the public. And my biggest issue with the FDA is all they care about, and I could be wrong. This could be a generalization, right? This could be not applicable to every drug on the market. All they care about is comparatively, is a drug that's released on the market better than a placebo? And is it super dangerous? If it's super dangerous, then you have to have a REMS program in place, which is just a risk assessment and mitigation process that makes sure that whoever is, it's just the doctor has to basically sign off saying, I know I'm giving a dangerous drug. And the REMS program is there to make sure that you have that. So if a drug is proven to be a mutagen, like a teratogen, something that causes birth defects, then you have to make sure that you're not hitting the right demographic, right? If you're hitting a demographic of like women in their 30s or late 20s and they're having kids, that's a dangerous demographic to introduce that drug into. So REMS kind of keeps doctors in check in that sense.
So it's more about liability mitigation versus betterment for people.
Right.
But it could be as minimally clinically efficacious as possible. But it's a risk reward thing.
Exactly.
It's like, this has a net benefit, and the net benefit can be very, very minute. And it's fine. Is that what you're saying? That's the problem.
And the real problem here is, okay, so like there's these companies, these pharmaceutical manufacturers who get into this market in the US, a specific silo of pharmaceutical manufacturing called Me Too product entanglement. And what it is essentially I entered a brand new, let's say I'm Roche, and I entered a market that hasn't been tapped into yet in terms of medicine. And I've spent hundreds of millions of dollars in research, and I come out with this fantastic drug. It has very little side effects. It's targeted toward this specific market. Now I'm another manufacturer. I'm not going to name names because I'm too scared to name names. But let's say there's another manufacturer and they see, oh, Roche entered this space. Now the only one's there. Well, let's spend a few $1 million on building something that's better than a placebo for that market. And then we spend all the rest of the money on hiring sales.
Yeah, marketing.
To go talk to the doctors, because doctors are heavily underinformed. I mean, most doctors nowadays don't even know genetics, right? Most doctors that are have been practicing for so many years that the part of their curriculum didn't include genetics.
Can I ask a really weird question? Because I'm uninformed of this. Is there also a problem with it because like Roche has the tech and resources to spend the capital on clinically validating a drug, and then maybe a competitor can just piggyback and leverage all the expenditure on something that may not even be better or more effective, and that's another problem.
It could very well be that I can't inform. That's like
bad behavior coming from this, is what I'm saying. Is that possible?
Yeah, I can't inform that understanding. I would believe that that's the case, but I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. All I know is you have to be better than a placebo, and that's all you need. So in this country, if you make a fantastic drug to fight something, to combat something, somebody else could enter that market, get more visibility because they're paying way more money for sales marketing, to go talk to your clinics and doctors.
And just wash you out.
And probably leverage.
Well, I think that also ties into a larger problem, which is that pharmaceutical companies in general will cite R&D costs as a reason for pharma being so expensive. But in reality, they actually spend more money on marketing and administration and executive salaries and dividends than they do on R&D by a lot.
Yeah.
Not
And
even
I don't
close,
like
it's
to,
a
I
lot.
don't want to generalize pharma companies because it turns into this conversation about them being inherently evil. And I don't believe that either. Right. Because it's not, we can't live in like this black and white world of pharmaceutical manufacturers being evil and everybody else being duped by them, because they exist for a reason and they have progressed medicine and helped us survive longer.
Quality of
live
life
with
has improved
conditions.
holistically too. So it's like, I
Right.
get it,
Well,
Right. You're simplifying what I'm saying
Yeah.
in six sentences.
No, he's right.
the
Like
thing is, there's no check against them.
Yeah.
So there's
there's an
Right.
inherent
They could do all
enigmatic
this
factor with
good, but
healthcare
there's-
too. Like when it comes to talking about bettering quality of life or coming up with healthcare related solutions, it's hard to quantify too. It's tough there. And like, you could say that like pharmaceutical solutions hide behind that. And fundamentally all they have to quantify and be accountable for is whether or not they're hurting patients. But there is how do I explain this? You can't, do you know what I'm kind of saying? I'm trying to say that like essentially it's easy for pharmaceutical companies to take advantage of something that's very complicated like healthcare.
Yes.
When it comes to product development,
Yeah.
which sucks, but that's just inherently,
Well, yeah, that's basically what I'm saying is there's no one really holding them accountable.
it's also
to
very
anything.
difficult to hold them accountable. It's a very complex matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
But
very difficult. And there's some crazy shit that goes on. I mean, you have specialty pharmacies that are also tied to certain healthcare payers. Can you believe that? Like, can you believe that? So like, you should always have this distribution, right? You can't have the reason that like McKesson, for example, is a massive distribution company. They can't enter the pharmaceutical space as an organization. There's like checks in place for that, because then you control everything, right? There's no reason for
Well,
them
I'm
to.
glad that exists. I didn't have the faith that it actually exists.
I think it exists. Now that I'm saying it, I'm scared that it doesn't, and I look like an idiot. But I'm pretty sure it exists.
I hope it exists.
If it doesn't exist, then it answers why you have a company like, for example, UHC. I'm not saying they're evil. Because the thing is, I've had their
Are they a
massive.
competitor of McKesson?
No,
Who
they're
is UHC?
payer. They're pharmaceutical payer. United Healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare. Yeah.
So-
UHC.
I'm stupid. I'm stupid for. I shouldn't have. There's
No.
no reason to.
I mean, I knew what it was.
Yeah.
Right.
I should have known. Cool.
Yeah. So Alex is the dumb one.
Yes.
Let's move on.
Yes. That sounds like a break.
No.
No? Okay.
So like United Healthcare actually owns Optum, who ships a lot of pharmaceuticals to people's houses, right? So Optum is a specialty pharmacy, and the payer that is paying to this specialty, or that is compensating, or that's paying the certain part of the fee
insurance
for the
has a
drug.
distribution company.
The insurance itself has that company. So
Yeah.
they're whatever their fees they're saying they're paying for part of this drug,
Yeah.
they're paying less.
They're paying
Yes.
to themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like that exists. So I understand the
That's the
how,
equivalent of Amazon.
yeah, I understand
Yes.
how unsettled
Like the-
people are.
Yeah. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand how unsettled they are. And I understand that a lot of pharmaceutical manufacturers use the United States specifically as a way to make money back, right? They don't charge the same for a brand new drug in other countries that they
Well,
do here.
other countries won't let them get away with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they make up a lot of the money here.
Well, let's be clear. They still make money in those other countries. It's not that they're losing money,
Oh, yeah.
because they wouldn't even be in the market if they were losing
course.
money. They just make all their profit here.
Not
all their
if they're making
excess
money,
profit.
they're essentially making profit.
You could say in short, they're maximizing here.
They're maximizing.
Yeah.
For
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
They're maximizing their income.
This is where
For the
all
first
the
7 years.
shareholder profit comes from.
The vast majority.
Yeah.
The
Most of
majority.
it.
The
Let's
majority.
call it
A
most of
good
it.
chunk of it. Yes. A lot of it. And I disagree with that. There's a lot of systems in place that I disagree with, and I think fundamentally that is the issue. Is we fix how we approach healthcare rather than I don't know where I was going with this argument.
No,
Because I'm anti single payer system in terms of like blindly canvassing a single payer system, like just like putting a single payer system in place. If it is specifically meant to deal with like negotiating, helping hospitals get the best prices for, let's say, hip replacement, pieces, parts for surgeries, whatever it is, you're generally negotiating, right? So different hospitals are getting different prices from the same manufacturer. There's always these back end meetings. If a single payer system could remove that, and it could make it so that if that manufacturer is selling to any person in the U.S., any healthcare system in the U.S., any part of the healthcare system in the U.S., that they would be paying whoever is paying the same price. That's beautiful. And I would love that if that's what a single payer system can accomplish.
Well, that's what it's supposed to do.
I don't think it.
That's what it does in most countries where it's implemented.
I understand, but the problem is a single payer system is implemented in most countries as the be all end all, or the majority stakeholder. In the U.S., they're not trying to take that position, especially because we're super pro business.
Well, it depends on who you talk to, but yes.
And we don't have the lobbying power to combat
currently
payers.
Currently,
we don't have the resources to combat payers, and there's no reason to get rid of the privatized system. If it's effective, all it needs is a few more checks and balances. So,
but the argument is it's not effective, and a few more checks and balances would make a difference, but it wouldn't be the same.
How do you get rid of that, man? How do you get rid of
the quality of healthcare here is good, but vastly too expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and even that, the quality of healthcare is very variable.
Yes.
Because our average quality of healthcare is not that great, but our quality of healthcare at the top 10% is really
but I'm
good.
actually also, but when it comes to,
because our life expectancy is not at the top of it's not even close to the top of the world. Our infant mortality is like, it's embarrassingly low.
Well,
infant mortality is more interesting to me, but life expectancy has nothing to do, in my opinion, with what we're talking about, because
obesity.
Well, there's clearly other factors, but
because healthcare across the world is not preventative based. That's beyond what we're talking about. But
yes and no. I mean, if you have no costs for going to the doctor,
you're talking about primary care. Yeah, fundamentally, like primary care. Go to the doctor if primary care is is very, very yes and no.
And that's preventative.
I also think that there's just an inherent compliance issue here and like a lifestyle issue here.
A lifestyle issue?
Yeah. I think people here work more, sleep less. We're number 2 in the world for obesity.
Okay,
I'm talking about things that are going against the whole preventative installments. No. Sorry. I'm talking about that. Go on. Keep talking. Yeah. I'm just looking at it at the low end and the high end, and I was asking about like what the ceiling is for the healthcare you can get in the United States, and then what the low end is. I understand that the average healthcare.
So you're saying we have such aggressively confounding factors.
Yeah, before just saying.
But even take life expectancy out of the equation in general. Okay. Just in general, healthcare outcomes are very basically segregated.
Right.
It's just
yeah.
It's because we have a system that is based on individuals paying for their healthcare to some extent or another. And if you work a white collar job with great health insurance, you're going to access the doctor more often. You're going to do more preventative care. You're going to be on top of your chronic diseases.
Right.
And obviously the flip side to this being that if we have all these people who don't do those things, eventually they end up being more expensive.
Right.
Because they have to do something at some point and they won't be able to pay for it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then when they can't pay for it, effectively everyone who has insurance pays for it next year. Yeah. They don't pay for it right then. They pay for it the next year because the rates go up.
It's very interesting. A lot of healthcare solutions that, we give other countries credit for, they stem from a lot of innovation here. It's just a system and distribution of that here is shit. But at the end of the day, a capitalist world or a capitalist nation like here also spurns the innovation and like acceleration. Well, it's like a weird situation.
To be clear,
I shouldn't think retrospectively, but
of course, the United States is the origin for a lot of drugs and a lot of devices
that are then used elsewhere, and then their healthcare system is catered for better overall healthcare than here.
Let's also not forget that many of those drugs, and I'm not sure about devices, but many of those drugs, the initial research is funded by government funding in universities, and then it's bought for effectively pennies on the dollar by a pharma company to distribute, to get through FDA and then distribute. So yes, like obviously the United States, our healthcare system creates many of the component parts that go into other healthcare systems around the world. But obviously I don't think we have to operate the way we operate to continue that.
I don't like, I see a few huge operational inefficiencies that could be fixed and that could help. Because at the end of the day, we're looking for patient outcomes. We're trying to fix patient outcomes. We're trying to make people healthier. If that, like, it's kind of like you know how sustainability was like shit talked in the early 2000s. Everybody's like, the hell are you talking about with sustainability? You're wasting our money, right? This is what corporations would say. You're wasting our money. You're throwing away our money. You're forcing us to lose money. That was the argument. And then 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road, when the technology progressed enough, they started recognizing that they're actually saving tons of money over the course of the life of whatever technology they're using.
So incentives drive change.
The incentives drive change. The incentive here should be to make the patient healthier. And if we can do that, and if we can improve certain technologies to be able to capture that, we don't need to overhaul a system. One of the things I've observed is the electronic medical records, right? So you go to the hospital office.
Well, hold on, before we get into this, this is break numero uno.
Okay. Okay.
We'll be back in a minute. Hey there, podcast listeners. This episode of Spy-Fi After Dark is sponsored by me. That's right, me. Specifically, it's sponsored by the Iowa Maucus Project, which is an electoral technology project and accompanying live stream happening sometime in August. I've talked about the Maucus on here before, so I'm not going to bore you with the details. Head on over to iowamaucus.com to learn more about it. But the short version is that it's a caucus app. We're going to basically show that the Iowa Democratic caucuses in 2020 were a sham and should never have been accepted. It's going to be a great time, going to be lots of fun. Check it out, iowamaucus.com. But specifically, what I wanted to talk to you about today was the Iowa Maucus devlogs that I'm doing on YouTube. You can find these by heading on over to YouTube and searching for Spy-Fi, which is the channel that the devlogs are on, or I mean, you could just search for Iowa Maucus devlog, I guess, if you wanted to. And basically, it's a behind-the-scenes process of how I'm building the Iowa Maucus. The first devlog was on the marketing strategy for the Maucus, and the second devlog, which I'm currently working on, is on how I'm building the software. It's kind of like a layman's version of how I make software. Anyways, we'll have other topics on there too. I'm hoping to produce episodes every other week or so, and they give you an insight into what the process of building something like this is like. So head on over to YouTube, search for Spy-Fi, search for Iowa Maucus devlog, check them out, hit that subscribe button. You know how it is. That's it for me. Let's get back to the video. All right, and we are back. So where were we exactly? Just picking up on.
So there's a few more things I was talking about. One was EMR. Yeah. I started with EMR.
Yes, EMR. That's right.
Particular,
EMR, by the way, stands for electronic medical records.
Sorry, I keep doing that.
It's fine.
It's not me being a prissy asshole. I promise.
Okay.
No, that's you being in the world,
in the weeds. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've been exposed to it, which is helpful for me to be able to have this conversation. I don't think that I'm more informed than most people. It's just the world I'm in. Thank you. So there's a few things. I'll start with EMR. I think electronic medical record systems are designed for the wrong purpose. They're not designed to help patient outcomes. Right? So like, what would you imagine a true like patient history, social history, medical history, surgical history, familial history? What would you imagine a system like that would be designed to do. It would be designed to take a patient's input, their familial input. It would be designed, it would track all possible, like it would use all possible predictive analytics.
Optimize clinical decision making.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that your medical, so like you're never going to catch 100%.
Well, let's first of all, let's be clear that the first problem is there are too many EMR systems.
Right.
No one is
But
on
the
the same
big
system.
problem-
And there's even if you have different systems, there should be a standardized input and data format
100%.
Oh,
that everyone
yes,
can use.
100%.
And
Yes.
then when you sign up for an EMS, it should look up your information in all the competing all the competing EMRs and coagulate them together.
There should be
Yes.
a platform too. Like if a hospital wanted to switch, that should be easy too.
Exactly.
100%.
It should be open
It's like
source
car
so that if you
insurance.
switch,
I mean, it
you
should
can
be
move.
very.
And that's why it isn't, is because the companies who make it don't want their customers to switch. They want it to be as difficult as possible, so they don't make it easy.
But the other thing is, EMRs are not built for doctors. That's why it's hard to get doctors to write notes.
Who are they built for?
They're built for administrators.
Okay, that's what I figured.
They're billing systems. They're not patient care systems. You're tracking all this patient information, but it's essentially a billing system. It's saying the patient was here for this issue. We gave them this drug and we spent this much time with them. The ICD-10 codes, pick out your ICD-10 code, pick out your CPT-4 code, pick out all your different codes for how, and then use that to bill the patient. Make sure your claims come in correctly. You make sure the EMR captures all the information that's necessary so that when you fill out your claims form,
They get accepted.
they get accepted.
Yeah.
Right. That the ultimate point of an EMR is to make sure that the clinic or hospital gets paid for their services. Now that's great, but that should be secondary.
And it should,
right.
Well, it should be a separate function.
Right. It should be. It should be like if Amazon was built on its payment system and not its distribution of
Not its logistics.
not its
system. Yeah.
logistics. What the hell would it would be a piece of shit.
Yeah.
My question to you guys is there actually, is this just the fact that the terms are interchangeable, or is this because that exists? There's also EHRs. Are EHRs separate than
It's the same
EMRs? Are they?
thing.
It's the
Okay.
same.
Electronic
Okay.
It
health
should be.
record,
Yes.
electronic medical record.
Yes, I was
it's the same
curious
thing.
if like that actually was more in the weeds and like incorporated UIs for clinicians.
Yeah.
More about
Okay,
how.
so here's a pitch then. Open source EHR data format that is built into an app that just tracks someone's information,
Yes.
and that's it.
With a bunch of data analytics attached to it, because that's the most important
That's
part.
what the market does. The market then, so you just put out an open source format for the data, and then the market can go and innovate on top of that,
Okay.
and can make their own EHR that adds, predictive AI and whatever else they want to.
Well,
whatever
payers-
other buzzwords they want to throw into it.
Payers and the government give you an idea of what you should be looking for anyway. You don't like clinics are so overwhelmed by the low quality of their EMR systems that they don't do half the things that they could do for a lot of money.
Okay,
Like-
so that's interesting. My mom is a nurse practitioner, psychiatric nurse practitioner. So she works with an EMR system all the time. And she is smart enough to look at all the different billing codes and understand like how she can bill to maximize revenue. She doesn't work for herself. She works for a clinic.
Right.
But she does her best to maximize the revenue of her visits for her clinic because like it just occurs to her to do that.
Right.
Versus she has colleagues that don't do that and they end up billing less than they probably could. And most of their funds in their case come from the state health agency and Medicaid. And so I've realized that was like a related topic of these systems. You have to kind of know how to set up your data and your notes. The way she describes it, she has to write her notes in a certain way in order to qualify for certain codes that pay better.
Right.
So it's nuanced a little bit.
It's nuanced because it completely depends on how, if your claims are going to get rejected or not. Too,
Yes.
like your doctor's notes, the information you put on there. And I agree, but I think that clinics are being forced to look at the short-term billing versus the long-term payment for things that they could address, like for specific demographics that they're not addressing. So like if you have if you're a certain type of clinic and you have a certain patient demographic that your clinic attends to more. Your payers that you're attached to and your, because like, you know how certain clinics won't support certain payers, right? So like if you have Aetna, you might not be able to go to a certain clinic.
Yeah.
So they have that relationship with a payer and they have a relationship with the government. And both of those entities give them incentive structures. So like they're like, hey, you hit this mark, we'll give you this much money. You hit this mark, we give you this much money. But they don't have a system, they don't have any kind of technology to be able to enable them to succeed in that. So the only person that's collecting the data analytics is the healthcare, the payer or the government who's looking at the macro view and taking all this data and actually computing that. But they don't have the capability. If clinics and hospitals had data analytics in their fingertips, it would be a lot easier for them to hit those goals and get that money so you can charge the patients a little less and you still won't be screwed over. You still end up making more money as a clinic. And that's the most important thing is we need to figure out what is hurting patient outcomes, fix those, because that'll end up saving patients' lives and payers' money. And there's nothing wrong with doing both. It's extremely important to make sure businesses are making money. Like if you're a for-profit organization, your goal is to make money. So if anybody proposes something that fucks you over, nobody's going to listen. You're going to try to fight it. But if you are saving money and your patient outcomes are better, that is a win-win for both sides. That's what we need to concentrate on in the healthcare system.
So I think in a way that's one of the best arguments for single payer because it's an overhaul. You reduce all the administrative overhead of running a clinic. Instead of having to negotiate deals with 36 different payers or more, and instead of having to maintain all these different billing codes and billing systems for all these payers, you have one system and one system alone that covers, 90% of people or whatever.
100%.
And then that reduces your costs as a clinic considerably. You don't have to have so much billing staff and administrative staff.
Yeah, administrative overhead can go down from it.
Yeah.
So that's for me personally, that's the main reason I support single payer as a policy because it's going to be so much cheaper and you're still going to have better health outcomes.
The fundamental issue for me is what we talked about in the break is I have no faith in a single payer system working out with knowing that the leadership who is going to be running the establishment of that single payer system is not the best people for the job.
So then flip it around. For all those countries that do have a successful single payer system, what makes that a successful system?
What makes that a successful system? It works for the average civilian and they're willing to pay a little more in taxes. Generally, European countries charge more in taxes.
So between that and proposed system in America, like what's the difference? Like, why is it not a good idea in America, but a great idea in these other countries? Is it just the quality of leadership?
Because the quality of leadership is one of the things I'm concerned about because we have a lobbying structure that a lot of countries don't, right? We have too much on a state level and federal level. We have and state level is way worse. And we have states' rights. So like a lot of like the federal implication of doing it, like if you tried to federally implement a single payer system, you'd have to figure out a way for that to also be able to be tweaked state to state because states are going to want that ability. And the federal government in the US especially like always supports the state. It's always about states. So that makes it 100 times more complicated. But the fact that you have people in senior positions making decisions for single payer system that are lobbied for, where that individual's not there for their intellectual capability, but because they've been there for 20 years and they're in that role, now they're making a decision. They have to reach out to so-called SMEs, subject matter experts in the field to be able to start making those decisions. And those policy experts are either individuals that are coming from organizations that are already lobbying those politicians or those decision makers, or they are individuals who probably are also directly lobbied against. So
how do they make these decisions in other countries?
I don't know, man. All I know is what's happening in the US.
My point being, it would be worthwhile, and I don't know the answer either.
Mm-hmm.
It would be worthwhile to discover what it is that makes these systems successful in other countries, because they're clearly successful. It's clearly something worth pursuing.
Mm-hmm. But
Right.
Krish has also just identified like a smaller but very immediate problem that we could tackle, which is administrative overhead due to an issue with billing, due to unnecessary
change a lot of
complexity. And
things.
you were saying that could lead us to consolidating and single payer, but that's something we could focus on now.
So are you pitching us a new startup idea? Is that?
The open
Dude,
source,
there's so many ideas.
but the open source idea is good.
Yeah.
For data analytics to come
It's
into.
a great idea.
I always thought it would be really cool beyond the open, like you build this on top of the open source data record setup, but you have an EHR that exists locally on your phone, doesn't exist on a server.
I mean, that was my project.
Yeah, it's basically adapted version of
3-layer
of what we
security.
talked
It
about.
doesn't have to be
And you do either a biometric lock or something,
Yeah.
but basically you have it scans with RFID. They have an RFID scanner, boom, and then it transfers your data to them to use for their current session.
The design decisions made in the healthcare space are so much more rudimentary than if you're in software. And I think we are approaching healthcare with the mentality of software. And you have to understand that people who participate in the healthcare system are
That's disrespectful, dude.
they don't know. They don't know. They're not trained.
You're right. You're 100% right.
And they get intimidated. And I think any system we have to grow into that. We have to grow into that, and it is the future for it. But it is the newer generation that's going to adapt to that, not the vast majority of the population. And the most effective way to treat this problem is to figure out something that all doctors can do, or most of them can do, because they don't even have to do anything.
Well, yeah. So
They just listen to a system.
From my perspective, at a high level, the American medical system seems to be pretty rough for most providers and doctors, and of course for patients.
Mm-hmm.
And all the benefits are currently going to drug companies, device manufacturers, and health insurance companies for the most part. And so obviously that signals the fact that our current system is just fundamentally lopsided.
Right.
And of course, my argument would be there's really no fixing that. You have to design something new.
Right.
Because it's fundamentally corrupted.
Yeah.
But there are certainly opportunities for improvement where we are.
I just think that
The question is it worth expending the time, energy, and political capital on those instead of just putting it towards replacing it wholesale?
see,
But,
and
but
that's
there's behavioral change implications with his idea too. Like it could have a cascading effect, and things could really improve with that change. You don't necessarily have to overhaul it. I don't think you would have to overhaul it.
you have to understand that my perspective is fundamental. Comes from this place where I fundamentally. Why does he keep saying the word fundamentally?
Because it's a fun word.
Yeah, where I am scared of lobbying. I am truly scared of lobbying. And so if I am on the other side of lobbying where I can get screwed based on that, I don't think it'll be successful. And that's why I'm scared of a single payer system. But if you are lobbying, if you're trying to make small changes that will have a massive impact, right? Change the EMR system, change the FDA approval process, change CLIA labs. Those are things, I'll talk about CLIA labs too. Those are the things that we could do to directly impact things, and we could be on the lobbying side of that. So I don't think lobbying is the most evil thing, but I think that we need to wield it. It's the most powerful weapon in politics.
Lobbying has to exist because politicians themselves and their staff don't have the resources to understand the nuances of every issue.
Yeah.
And there are stakeholders in any issue that deserve to at least have something to say.
Oh, they're stakeholders. Yes.
So instead of
No,
giving
yes.
them, you take the Democratic Party, every single person is going to have a slightly different interpretation of what a single payer system means to them in terms of how it applies. Why present a generic idea that's hard to digest rather than giving them 3 solid ideas that will definitely make a positive impact and that's very hard to forget? It's hard. It's so easy to understand once you get introduced to it. So for me, it's fundamentally changing how the FDA approves medication, making it cheaper for higher quality things to get through. And I know they have a fast track process, but I still don't believe it's good. Changing how EMRs work and changing CLIA labs. And I don't think this directly affects costs as much, but I think it affects the outcome of care, because there's these things called CLIA labs. Like you have a Quest, Sonora, and all those. So
what does CLIA stand for?
Oh, I forgot. Don't remember, man.
You don't have to look it up.
Okay. So
CLIA labs, Sonora, what else was it?
They're these governmentally approved labs for testing.
CLIA
I think FDA is the one who gives them a CLIA certification. Sorry, go ahead.
I think CLIA itself is an entity.
Yes.
Like
and it's like, hey, I have these devices to be able to do this thing in my lab. I have this, like the CLIA has like a certain criterion, and you meet that, you check all the boxes, your lab suddenly becomes a CLIA lab. And the problem with that is then after that you get that certification, you can do whatever the
it's very
fuck you want to do. I can. So for example, I am a personalized medicine manufacturer. If I'm building personalized medicines, that's genetics based, right? So to figure out if it's going to be effective for somebody, you also have to have a companion diagnostic that actually checks their blood and says, hey, you have the right genes for this thing, so we can prescribe it to you, it'll be effective. Because this thing's $100,000 treatment, but we know it'll cure you. That's why it's personalized medicine. Mm-hmm. So an organization, let's take Roche as an example again, because it's immediate for me. It's easy to discuss because they build a lot of good shit. Genentech, Roche's subsidiary, builds these drugs, and Roche Tissue Diagnostics in Tucson, Ventana, builds the companion diagnostics for it. So those companion diagnostics are critically important, right? Because if they're wrong,
a solution's only as good as a companion diagnostic.
Yeah,
you're right.
If they're wrong, think about your payers are not going to want to pay for that drug anymore in the future. In the future, if you know you're almost 100% right with your companion diagnostics, and anybody that the companion diagnostic says is viable for this treatment is viable, then the payer is going to be like, okay, that's perfect, because we're paying immediately, but we're getting a huge outcome at reduced cost for the patient.
Is the CLIA certification too big of a barrier to entry cost wise? Is that what you're worried about?
No,
what's
those labs are the ones that are allowed to run those tests on those companion diagnostics. So if I'm manufacturing a companion diagnostic, I have to go give it to those labs, right? And I have to teach them how to use it. Now they learned how to use it, they reverse engineer it. And they don't have to get any kind of FDA approval to use that. And they can tell that, so they can say, hey, you want to check this patient for this drug, use our companion diagnostic, and it'll cost you a lot less than Roche's version.
But it doesn't have to be reapproved?
It doesn't have to be reapproved.
That's messed up.
That's my huge issue. So there's a few fundamental things that I'm like, this is fucked.
Okay.
And if we could fix those three things.
Well, that's 3 actionable items.
Yeah,
like that.
Simple actionable items.
All right, we're going to go into break numero dos. We'll be back in a second. Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Millan Singh, host of Spy-Fi After Dark. I'm here to just please ask you to rate and or subscribe on whatever platform you might be listening on. It really makes a really big difference to us, and it makes us feel really good about ourselves, so you really should just do it for that reason alone, honestly. But seriously, it boosts our organic search rankings and makes it easier for people to find the podcast. And so it would really help us out a lot if you could shoot us a rating, subscription, whatever's applicable on whatever platform you might be listening on. Anyways, that's it for me. Let's get back to the episode. All right, and we're back for part 3, finale.
I've already said what I want to say. Sorry.
So we were just during the break discussing like what's the barrier to implementing the EMR, like an EMR that actually functions as an EMR. And I was saying that I think that really the main roadblock is just the cost of implementing.
And growing pains.
there's growing. There's a user cost because I do think a lot of providers, doctors are older doctors now because we're not graduating enough doctors.
Yeah.
Like the requirements to get into med school are too high, and therefore we're not getting enough people going through med school, which is mostly because the boards that certify doctors want to try to make themselves exclusive so they can charge more money.
Yeah.
And so, but as a result, providers are technologically outdated and in many cases don't have a lot of cash reserves to invest in a new system. And
they're scared.
And any sort of change like this, it's costly in so many ways, between outright cost and then labor cost and time to switch and training and all that. Like there's a lot of costs involved in a switch like this. And they already went through the process of adopting an EMR, and they found it was a really shitty process. So they're probably very hesitant to consider anything else at this point. And they're just like, you know what? This kind of patchwork works for now. We're surviving. We'll keep going. I really just think they're in a survival mindset.
Yeah.
And they're not operating from a place of any sort of abundance. So they can't make an investment.
I can only imagine, because everything is a sales pitch to a clinic. Everything.
Yeah.
From what drug you should prescribe to what EMR you should use is a sales pitch on the part of the business that you're never trained in as a doctor.
Yes.
You're a family practice doctor. You're running a clinic or you own a clinic. You're not trained in that aspect of the business. You're only trained in being a doctor. Everything else is, do I believe this guy? And they've been let down enough times that they don't anymore. Especially the ones that have been practicing for so many years.
This kind of circles back to a larger concept that I've thought about, which is I think we need to determine a new model that sits somewhere between for-profit and non-profit.
Yeah.
Because there are things like, in my opinion, healthcare is much more like education than it is like a consumer good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty widely considered at this point that education should be operated nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think healthcare, we need to have some sort of a shift to take some of the profit motive out of some areas where it's hurting the business. So what do you think of the concept of requiring all healthcare insurance companies to be nonprofit companies as an interim step to single payer?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a great idea if it was viable. Again, like I'm not arguing against single payer.
Why wouldn't it be viable? We're not implementing any new administration here. We're just saying you have to operate as a nonprofit.
Yeah. We haven't even done that with our jails yet. How do you think we're going to do that with our healthcare payer system? I mean, that's the worst offense. You're putting people in jail and you're incentivizing private prisons to keep them in jail.
And free labor. Which
Yeah.
Millan and I
With their
talked about.
demerit system. The fuck is that? I mean, 10 times more demerit. I mean, like what is the number?
I mean, private prisons should be, well, the thing with private prisons is that's something that has creeped in.
Mm-hmm.
Like this prison system was always a public system.
Yeah.
And private prisons have creeped their way on in over the past 20, 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, it started with Reagan.
Yeah.
Right. But it's at the end of the day, we have the majority of our population in private prisons, correct? It's not, I don't think it's in government prisons.
Oh, and
No, I don't
the
think
incarcerated.
so. I think private prisons are still a minority.
Are they?
But it depends on the level you're talking about. I'm pretty sure it's different it's different state to state. Federal prisons, I'm pretty sure are all government run or primarily government run.
Okay.
States have different policies. Like I know Arizona does contract with private prisons.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know what the percentage is of total population.
Yeah. But there's a huge issue with that too, because, oh God, if we jump into that, well, there's a few fundamental issues I have with private prisons. First thing, it should never be a for-profit model because you're incentivizing people to stay in jail.
Yeah.
Right. You get paid for how many people are in your prison.
Yeah.
Secondary to that, a lot of these contracts that states sign with private prisons are capacities. So like are for specific capacity. So if you are under the capacity, they can fine you. A private prison can fine, like I think Arizona or some state recently got fined like $10 million. Well, because they under
what I was under the impression that they would just be paid for a minimum occupancy.
They
Like
get
there's a floor of
if
occupancy.
there is not, if they don't hit a minimum occupancy number that they've contracted with that state, they fine the state a certain number of millions of dollars.
okay.
Granted, only 8.4% of prisoners in the United States were housed in private prisons in 2018.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
seems
but
fine.
still,
it's a very small number.
conceptually, I mean,
because
But
I'm
I'm
pretty
yeah.
sure I'm pretty sure all federal prisons are government prisons, and I'm pretty sure that only some
Stateside, do
states
you have-
contract, and they
Yeah.
only contract so much.
Yeah.
But still, it should be zero.
It should be zero. And the fact that only 8% of the population is housed in private prison, and these private prison systems are billion-dollar companies.
They make some bank.
that's
They're
even worse.
billion-dollar organizations is
Yeah.
ridiculous. That means
It's absurd.
8% of our number, whatever that number is huge.
Mhm.
The number
Well, yeah,
is
'cause we
fucking
have-
unbelievable.
25% of
worse.
the world's prison population or something.
5% of our population is in prison.
That
Well,
high?
Yes.
No, okay. It's the stat is the United States is like 4% of the world population or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And we have 25% of the world's prison population.
That's because most countries probably don't have 5%
Yeah.
of their
Absolutely.
population in car. That's fucking high.
Yeah, our
per
incarceration
One in
rate-
20 of us?
Now, I don't believe that we're the worst because China
No.
exists and they don't report their numbers.
maybe not.
I guess.
The
Yeah.
thing is, China has so many people. They would have to be imprisoning so many people to compete with
keep
us
the
because they have
proportion-wise.
so many more.
Yeah.
So they probably imprison a lot of
per
people.
capita rate might be higher
Their
here.
per
still.
capita rate here has to be higher, just statistically.
As of 2016, 2.3 million people were incarcerated in the U.S. at a rate of 698 per 100,000
That's-
people.
That's like 7%. 6%.
No,
No.
698 for 100,000. So less than 1%. I'm a moron.
Oh, I thought you said 2.3. Oh, you're right. It's less than 1%. That's less than 1%.
0.7%.
In 2008, the U.S. had around 24.7%
Yeah, I
of
meant
the world's
0.7, not 7.
9.8 million prisoners. So there's 9.8 million reported in the world.
Wait, but we had that many prisoners, but was that at any given time or was that in aggregate over the course of the year?
Oh.
I assume it's an aggregate.
Are you sure?
I mean, that's what would it. I don't know.
Because they could have just captured the data at one point in time.
They could have captured it at one point in time, but it wouldn't be reasonable. And even if they did, I guess it still
It
wouldn't
wouldn't
be
be
that bad.
reasonable, but I don't necessarily have faith that it wouldn't be done otherwise.
Right.
Because a lot of data is collected unreasonably on purpose.
So even if this data is inflated by double, it's still jarring.
You know, it's
Even if
ridiculous
it was-
either way.
Yeah.
No, what I mean is it's probably higher than that number.
Oh,
Yeah.
Because if you count in aggregate over the entire year,
Yeah.
people are not in prison necessarily for the whole year. They may only be in prison for 3 or 6 months.
yeah. So again, coming back to the healthcare thing, that's why I don't trust that we could ever do that to those systems, because we can't do this to private prison systems who are worth $1.3 billion, $1.8 billion each. UHC, United Healthcare alone, is netting how many? Like $209 billion in revenue every year, 212. It's some ridiculous number. Where's your lobbying power?
Let's see. UNH.
Or UHC?
Yeah, UHC.
Well, UNH is the stock code.
Oh,
Their market cap is $282 billion.
there you go. And what was the revenue
Enterprise
last year?
value is $310 billion.
What was the revenues last year? It's high. It's in the 200s.
Revenue. Yeah. Okay, wait. This just says it doesn't say specifically when, but there's just a revenue figure that says 246 billion.
246. So that must be more recent because they're growing. I think they're number 5 in the Forbes 500.
But we should care about their operating income or their
Yeah.
margins, not their revenue.
Just saying UHC alone. So UHC and CVS Caremark are both in the top 10 of the Forbes 100 list.
It looks like their operating revenue is still like 20 billion.
Yeah. And I think Walgreens is like 25th or 24th.
20 billion.
Yeah.
So of the top 25 companies, at least 3 or
What?
4 are in the healthcare business. And if you make
That's
it the
pretty-
top 100, it's way more than that.
That's pretty high.
Well, and the thing is, the healthcare insurance companies have consolidated in lockstep with the pharma companies consolidating, because they're basically perpetually fighting each other.
Yeah.
So as one industry consolidates, the other industry consolidates to be able to compete.
You're talking about the healthcare, like hospital systems?
Not hospitals, like pharma and insurance, or device and insurance, because pharma companies have also been consolidating, and they're worth similar amounts.
They're always consolidating because
They basically have to track each other.
Yeah.
Because the healthcare insurance companies have to negotiate with pharma companies. And if pharma companies were so much bigger than the health insurance companies, they couldn't negotiate.
pharma companies are not even close to as big as the payers. Not even close. I don't know what the next biggest pharma company is.
In terms of revenue, no. But in terms of like the amount of people that use them, they're similar scale. if
I
that
think in
makes
terms of
sense.
the industry,
Right. So you're saying
Like they're scaled to each other, relatively speaking.
relatively speaking, maybe. I don't know. I don't
But
know.
Much,
those numbers.
much more money passes through the payers.
Oh, right. You're
But
saying
they're scaled to each other.
yes. I get that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I still don't think that there's anything we can do to change it. I'm a pessimist, man.
Well,
I've given up on society a long
get-
time ago, so you can't
I-
ask me these questions.
I get where you're coming from. What I would say in response is, we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if we can or not. We have to. So we'll just have to find a way.
But that's why I suggested 3 actionable items instead of
like a radical
a
decision, like
generalized
making
idea.
providers,
Not providers,
Nonprofit.
payers.
nonprofit.
Because the
That's-
payers, all they're doing is administration.
Yes.
Like all they're doing is moving money around. There's no innovation to be had there.
Yeah.
There's no like benefit to the market being there. It's just literally people
Right.
directing funds.
Mhm.
That's all that's happened. That's why government is so well suited for it.
Right.
And that's why it works so well in every country that's implemented it.
Right.
Because that's what that's for.
Because you're not stifling its efficacy with some change in policy. I get that. It's just
Right.
a lot of money to suddenly.
It's too iffy. It's too many people have too many ideas of what they want a single payer system to look like. Too many states are going to get involved in that decision-making process. Certain groups are going to be very happy with the outcome. Other groups are not going to be very happy with the outcome. And at the end of the day, I think it's better to have 3 actionable items that are, when the average person hears what's happening, they're going to be on board. They're going to say 100% we support this. Doesn't make any sense. It's not, the only thing I have faith in passing successfully and being reasonably effective in helping people is things that are so cut and dry that there's there can't be a party bias.
Oh, they'll find one.
I agree, but at least it's hard. Single payer system already exists. It already exists as a party bias. I mean, it literally came up as a party, like a Democrat versus Republican thing. And it's not going to work, man. I don't know.
It's going to be deemed
Well,
radical.
The flip side to it is that when you talk to citizens, voters, it's just like how getting voters to get on board with back a little bit in the day, not that long ago, but like 10, 20 years ago now, getting voters to get on board with raising the minimum wage to $10 was really hard, but 15 was much easier because it's more of an effect on their lives. Like they can see and feel, and it feels like it will make a really big difference, right? It's hard to get voters excited about small changes because they have to expend their own political capital and their time.
Do you think that those are small changes?
To them, I think they are.
Yeah, but to them, presenting a big change without
this is how I'd qualify it. I'd say the EMR issue is something that can be solved with the market. You don't need a government to fix that. And then the lab issue, and then the FDA approval issue, it's not that they're small issues, but it's hard for an individual who doesn't have any knowledge of how this system works to understand how it's going to affect their life. Right. Versus if you say, what we're going to do is implement single payer healthcare at the government level to where you will pay another 6% payroll tax, but your healthcare is 100% covered. Mm-hmm. They understand what that means. They're like, oh, that means I can see the doctor every year. That means I can get my prescriptions. That means, so on and so forth.
But you could also just say, is it fair to tell them what they think, what they want to hear? That's essentially what we're doing.
Well, it's not necessarily what they want to hear. That's what your goal is.
Of
That's
course,
what you're trying to implement.
But so tell me what you believe is going to have a reasonable outcome. Because I don't think a single payer system is going to work. Because there's going to be too many fingers in the final product. There's going to be too many people influencing the final product for it to actually give the average person what they want. And then once they don't get what they want, what they've been promised, they're going to not believe you anymore. That's what's happening with our political system every day.
Realistically, I think that's a likely outcome currently. Like, I don't disagree with you necessarily. However, I think you are underestimating the power of simple and transformative leadership. And it's easy to say that, but the thing is, we just don't have it currently in government. But if we were in a position where we did have it, and you have someone who's elected president and says, this is the goal, I'm not going to let them mess this up.
Right. We have a bunch of simple leaders.
They're not going to get away with throwing in all this random shit and making this a 10,000 page bill.
Right.
Because that's just not going to be okay with me. And if they do that, I'm going to just tell all their constituents and say, hey, your representatives are fucking around and screwing you over.
And then they bury it. I mean,
can they? It's a president making a State of the Union
El Presidente
address.
has shown us how beautiful that can be.
What's wrong with not just focusing on smaller, more precise steps like implementing standardized EMR?
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just hard to get people to care enough to make it happen because it's such a...
But you can promise that by cutting administrative costs, you're going to remove strain on clinics and be able to offer improved healthcare. It's just not going to be like, there's not going to be much of a wow factor. It's not going to be as big of a change.
If you're talking about how we're going to sell it,
I'm just talking about small.
Exactly.
That one's not even politically
I think
biased.
Implementing small changes makes sense, but you have to factor in that there are forces that are going to try to politicize it. Mm-hmm. And they're going to likely be successful. So you have to be able to sell what you're trying to do to the general public to where it is unassailable in the general public.
Right. And
when it's something that has a relatively small effect, I mean, it's a high effect, but for me as an individual consumer of healthcare, it's hard for me to see what that effect actually is.
Okay. Labor force contribution to payer systems. Do we know what that is? They're going to have a derogatory opinion towards a change that we're advising about. I'm just saying. Do you know what I'm kind of saying?
No.
No. So like people work for payers too.
Yeah.
Okay. Stakeholders. So I'm just saying, like, on the one hand, I get what you're saying about implementing change. On the other hand, you try to implement a change as big as that, and there's going to be backlash too. I get it. I just figured that the whole like EMR like standardization is so small, and like I don't see that like negatively impacting
the EMR thing again. I don't think you need government policy.
You don't.
You don't.
No, you don't. But you do need a nudging. And you need the general population to understand because you can't, otherwise it's going to be a small thing going out to a few clinics, a few hospitals, and it'll take years for it to spread. So it is something that you do need visibility of. Mm-hmm. You need hospital systems to know that there's a better way.
I just don't think you necessarily have to go through government to get that visibility.
You don't.
No, you don't. It's about implementation. Like there's going to be no expediency. Yeah. There already is no expediency as it is.
I don't think we need to consider that as part of a part of the equation of getting something through politics, because the market can fix that as soon as someone implements an open source EMR format.
Yeah.
And as soon as that person has the backing to then push that to the public and inform the public how this works, then that can fix that
What's
problem.
easier though than is an individual coming out with a nonprofit or not-for-profit free to use software and then having the capability to make it highly visible to a market where competitors are going to shoot it down, or for the government to do it themselves? Because I don't trust them to accomplish a bunch of things.
So you're
but
saying
one
have the
simple
government
thing?
create the open source format?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that's what you
That's
were
what I was.
referring
That's
to.
what I was thinking.
That's where
too.
I was
figured
getting
that
to.
would be a more guaranteed like change for the better. That's not going to have as much radical
Yeah. You get wins.
implication.
We can, it's the same. Like I can package all three of those and say healthcare overhaul. And I use those two words and it doesn't mean anything to the general public. All it means to them is big changes are coming. Doesn't matter how big those changes are. If they're effective to the average person, then that doesn't matter. I mean,
Actually, there's more. There's more if you say, healthcare overhaul and there's like an overperceived implication of change, you're going to come off as like letting down the public.
right.
So if anything, do something small and say, you know what, there's going to be some
That's transformative.
that's
Mhm.
transformative. Yeah.
Well, we are a little over time, so we'll go ahead and cap it there. But well,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah. Appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
thank you for being here. That was it was a good change of topic, I think.
Yeah,
for the
definitely.
podcast. So appreciate it.
We stayed linear too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We didn't even touch COVID, so we didn't break our promise.
Not at all.
Oh no.
So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
Have a great day.
Bye bye.